Comic fans have a pretty unhealthy habit of comparing interpretations of their favorite characters to one another. Be it the age-old, which is the best Spider-Man argument, which cinematic Batman has the highest kill count, or which version of the Hulk was the most disappointing. But so far as an outsider to the community, I've noticed that TMNT fans either A, don't compare versions of the characters at all for some reason, or B, just don't really talk about the Turtles at all. They're so shy about it. It's such a nice, quiet little fandom that just enjoys seeing the 4 teenage reptiles get any representation at all, even if it's the Michael Bay kind. Over the past year, I watched both of the most recent completed TMNT shows, and I felt like I had a lot to say about them. So imagine this as a review for both at the same time. Hopefully without causing a war and disturbing the natural order, I can discuss something I see few people discussing. Which Ninja Turtles cartoon was the best? However, that question comes with some caveats. For a few reasons, I don't want to include the 80s cartoon into this analysis, mainly because it has 193 episodes, oh my Jesus. I'm a man with limited spare time as it is, and I can't really devote the time to all of that without this video coming out in 3 years. Additionally, that one feels the most nostalgic for me since I had quite a few VHS tapes full of episodes from it growing up. While these other two shows, I never really sat down and watched them until 2019. They're both more fresh in my mind. And lastly, the 80s animated Turtles are really hard to compare with these other ones because it made such big strides to be its own thing. With the lighthearted tone, the colorful and well-defined characters, and the kid-friendly action scenes, it was a far cry from what the Ninja Turtles were intended to be. Violent, murderous sewer monsters that'll fucking cut you to pieces and throw grenades and parodies of crazy, weird Frank Miller books. Daredevil was there too, I guess, but people forget about that. I'm also not including Rise of the TMNT because it's not over yet, and I haven't been able to watch much of it. So far, I think it's really cool, and I'd be open to doing a follow-up to review it along with the other two. For those that don't know because they're living in a sewer, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are a group of 4 mutated animals that gained intelligence and humanoid bodies through an accident involving that green chemical stuff that you found in a bottle under the sink and desperately want to taste. They're led by a humanoid rat named Splinter that trained the 4 of them in the art of ninjutsu to defend themselves and stay hidden from a world that's prejudiced against green people with shells. The details about their origin beyond that are shaky and heavily subject to change depending on which interpretation you watch. Hell, in some of the comics, they're the 5 reincarnated souls of a ninja master and his sons that were killed in feudal Japan. But we're not talking about that. Both the 2003 series and the 2012 series make strides to blend the lightness of the 80s show with the darkness of the comic in varying ratios, and I think it's what makes them both so unique. So let's look at it like the comic book and the 80s cartoon are both the parents of the general idea of Ninja Turtles. One contributed the majority of the premise, plot lines, and aesthetic, while the other contributed the more defined characters, friendlier tone, and widespread mainstream appeal. Both are awesome in their own right, and you have to commend the cartoon for developing the personalities of the Turtles a little more as well as giving them their own color schemes. Because telling these guys apart in black and white is a nightmare if they aren't holding a weapon. Plus all the Turtles' personalities during that time were the angry one. Ironically, as a kid, I couldn't tell Leonardo and Donatello apart because I'm colorblind and they just looks the same. I find it interesting that the 2003 show is almost word for word adapting scenes from the original comic.
Our backs are up against the wall in some trash-strewn alley, cornered by the toughest street gang on the east side. Nobody messes with the purple dragons, especially wearing stupid turtle costumes. He's wrong. We're not wearing costumes.
While the 2012 show tries to emulate and modernize more stories and characters from the 80s cartoon, they both do their thing based on the legacy of their parent of choice. If the 2012 show does adapt any stories from the comics, it's very sparingly and with a different twist. With our focus narrowed to just these two, let's compare and contrast what they both got right and, well, what they don't. The Ninja Turtles wouldn't be the famous brand they are without such iconic characters. Everyone has their own favorite because each one is so different from the rest. Raphael is the edgy, angry hothead with a temper, Mikey is the fun-loving party guy, Donatello is the brains of the operation, and Leonardo is the leader, the serious one, the responsible... I'm gonna lose a few subs over this, but Leonardo is usually the least interesting one. In TMNT 2003, everyone's pretty much where they should be, including Leo. The Turtles' banter is usually pretty jokey and fun, making them feel like old friends.
I'd like to see you try, hothead. Careful what you wish for, Splinter Jr.
They're the perfect blend of serious and comical, and I think they took a lot of cues from the 90s movie to get that ratio just right. I especially love their look in this show, as they remind me of like an Ed McGuinness Deadpool comic visually. However, I think the 2012 show took the characterization a little further and added more depth to each turtle. Not a lot, mind you, but more than they had, particularly Leo. The 2012 series goes out of its way to explain his desire to be a leader. He's more of a sci-fi and fantasy nerd who enjoys watching this Star Trek knockoff cartoon because he admires the main character so much for being a captain. And he also likes LARPing.
LARP. Live action role play.
If being a giant turtle monster didn't ensure his virginity was secured, that sure did. Only losers play dress up. I appreciate them giving him hobbies. Him liking comics and cartoons and nerdy stuff helps him feel less like a bland, over-serious chump. He and the other turtles finally have something to talk about other than just giving them orders. I've also noticed that the 2012 turtles tend to bicker more, and not just in a short, sassy way where they just exchange a few one-liners. I mean really argue. In that regard, I feel like their relationship as brothers is more believable because they get on each other's nerves, but they also feel more openly affectionate to each other too when they're not fighting. I feel their family bond is more fleshed out and real. I also really dig the voice actors they got for both shows. Each respective cast feels perfect for the version they're in. And seeing as how the 2012 show is more influenced by the 80s cartoon, it's fitting that they got back the original voice actor for Raphael to play Donatello.
Why do you sound so weird? Me sound weird? Heard yourself lately? Hey!
I do, however, kinda wish they hadn't recast Leonardo halfway through the show after his original voice, American Pie Man, got canceled for a controversial tweet.
So, why does he sound different? He sustained damage to his throat.
Ugh. After that, he was some guy who sounded close enough for 3 episodes, and then they finally committed to recasting him as Seth Green.
I know we shouldn't trust Karai, but still, I got the sense she really is fed up with Shredder. Okay, we need to come up with a plan. Part 1 is Mikey stays here. You've been messing up too much lately. We can't take the chance.
She gave me a clue where she is, though. She pointed east and said Comet.
His delivery for the lines is so different, and the voice is so far from what it was, he almost feels like a different character after that. Between the two versions of them, Splinter is still a loving father in each who wishes the best for his sons. Both Splinters occasionally make wisecracks that catch the turtles off guard, and both can be a badass when necessary. They differ in that 2012 Splinter isn't really, elderly. He's most likely in his mid-40s at the latest, and they give him the background of being Ninja Master Hamato Yoshi instead of being his pet, which is another inspiration from the 80s cartoon. With that background, his connection with the Shredder is more personal because they were essentially brothers. I prefer this younger, more badass version of Splinter, especially since he's so tough even all 4 turtles at once can't quite beat him in a serious fight. Casey Jones from the 2003 series has to take the prize though. It feels as if they just directly transplanted him from the 90s movie in looks and personality. The 2012 take is interesting though, but I don't think the decision to make him and April so young ultimately added anything. And I just really don't like his costume. I will give Josh Peck props for some solid voice acting though. And then there's April. Aside from being the human confidant and like a big sister to the turtles, these takes are pretty drastically different. The 2003 version is almost one-to-one from the comic and her origins. Also where she lives, her personality, a lot of her storylines. 2003 April is definitely the most accurate take from the comics thus far, while the 2012 April O'Neil is just something else. For one, I think making her some kind of special mutant chosen one with superpowers was kinda terrible. At the very least, it wasn't executed in a way that was very satisfying. There's some kind of half-assed backstory about her mother being experimented on before she was born by a race of interdimensional beings called the Brain, a nod to the 80s character. As a result, she's now unable to be mutated, she's able to sense other mutants at a distance, can use telekinesis, and Splinter trains her to be a ninja on par with the turtles in, less than a year. I can get behind the idea of making her special and allowing her to be a member of the team as a fighter, because, that's not new. But by the end of the series, she just feels overpowered. And the explanation and introduction of all this backstory is really clumsily thrown into quick dialogue in maybe 3 scenes throughout the show. Then every character just accepts it and moves on. The Krang want her for some kind of plot to take over the world, but after it fails once, they never really go after her again. And just write it off as a goof, whoops. I think it would have been better if they committed more fully to making April a chosen one instead of abandoning it so early. And I especially think they could have done with just giving her 1 combat thing instead of 2. Because being a ninja and telekinetic, that's overkill, man. She's basically Kenshi with eyes. I have to mention the relationship of both Aprils. April and Casey in the 2003 show is a really fun background element that they develop in a realistic way over the series, but it's never distracting or overwhelming. At first she can't stand the guy, and he thinks she's pretty stuck up, but as they save each other's lives and get more involved in crazy shit, they start to see each other's good sides. And at the end of the series, they get married in an episode that feels really earned for both of them. 2012, April and Casey definitely flirt, but never really date per se, because the show is too interested in this god-awful love triangle with Donatello. Yes, Donatello desperately wants to show April his bow staff throughout the show and is jealous of Casey. But she never ends up with either of them, and they attempt to resolve the triangle multiple times. April lets him down gently, and he's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I can take a hint." Then the next episode after that, he's crushing again. It's especially frustrating when he goes, "Hey, sorry I'm being weird and overbearing, I'll back off now." And then she kisses him on the cheek and encourages him again. She's kissing him constantly and just making it worse. At the end of the day, this just means I really can't tell what April wants as a character, or where the writers were intending to go with this, because eventually they just drop it entirely around the middle of the 4th season without any conclusion. I guess maybe they didn't have a plan for it, and being wishy-washy about the direction just led them to giving up on it because it wasn't getting anywhere. Ugh, jeez. Too much talking about awkwardly aborted relationship subplots. I feel like we're talking about Star Wars. Let's talk about the villains. Sorry to have to cut this video in half, dear viewers, but I need to get something uploaded, and I need to let you all know that here at old GodzillaMendoza Industries, we've fallen on some hard times. January and February are the lowest months for views and revenue for any YouTuber, and it's become increasingly clear that using YouTube ads as my main source of online income is preposterous. So now I'm doing the Bernie meme and asking for your help. I know I don't advertise my Patreon often, but I figured that if just 3% of my subscribers on YouTube gave me $1 a month, just $1, I'd be pretty much set forever. So I'm asking you, please be in that 3% and help me keep the lights on so I can keep making these videos. Part 2 of this on the way soon.